Welcome everyone to the finale of What If Cliffjumper Survived, as well as the omniverse of Nick. And before we get into today's episode, be sure as always to smash that like button, subscribe to the omniverse of Nick, and comment your favorite part of this current series, as well as future requests for stories and discussions to happen on this channel in the future. Once you got all that out of the way, we shall commence with today's episode and the finale to the Cliff story. We wrapped up with Starscream having a lot more red energon than in canon. But before we get into that, which will be the highlight of this episode and finale, we cut to the Nemesis. Silas, at the Nemesis with Megatron and the Decepticons, says that he wishes to go after the next Omega Key since Dreadwing went in Knockout's place, and now Silas wants to go in his, which would originally be his in canon. You guys know the drill if you've seen the show. And he says that he might have failed to keep Damocles going, but he feels that Wheeljack's death earns him an extra place along with Damocles' more prominent success in this story. Megatron is definitely surprised that a human could go this far, still get his surveillance chief killed, mind you, and still go this far and still want more and want to prove himself. Originally, Megatron just wanted to ice him and put him on the table with Knockout, especially for what happened to Breakdown. But you know what? Megatron says that he doesn't know if Silas is truly worthy enough as of late as for what has happened to the Decepticon cause to go after the next key. But then Knockout pipes up and says he'll go alongside and he'll help get the next key to ensure maximum securing of the artifact. I'm sure the Decepticons, especially without Zenwave, they would not know a jack thing about the Omega Keys. But Megatron remains even more unconvinced because of Knockout's equal failure and why he would want to team with the guy who dissected Breakdown. But Knockout just says he wants even more than what Silas wants. Proof he's a worthy Decepticon. And what better way for two people who have literally not rose up to the task enough than to do Megatron the favor of getting this key personally. Silas says all he cares about is proving himself regardless. He's making up for the whole Soundwave makeshift and then the Damocles failure, sure, but he's not going nearly as far with it as Knockout is. But Megatron still says, as much as he remains unconvinced, Silas has proved his mettle with some causes. So he agrees, but he says to both of them with dead eyes, you better return with the article or not at all. Afterwards, going on to get the relic, article, whatever the frick you want to call it, Silas confronts Knockout and is very surprised to see him stepping up to team up with him. Even if it's to prove himself highly and everything, he'd expect Knockout to dice him on the first opportunity. Especially after what happened to, the host he's wearing body, in pretty much mocking about Breakdown a little bit. Knockout is really angry about this, and honestly, yes, he really should have just tased Silas on the first opportunity. But he holds himself back as he has, because his loyalty to Megatron matters kind of a bit more than his loyalty to Breakdown, in a way. You know what I'm saying? In a way, it's weird. Meanwhile, Bulkhead and Smokescreen, like canon, are going out to retrieve the key. And that doesn't change. The two of them are still going to go. And once they get there, they encounter Knockout, who fights Smokescreen, and Silas, who begins a brawl with Bulkhead. And this would honestly go the same as their first encounter, except Bulkhead has more room to stand on, literally, and is much more able to put up a fight. And this time, even though he did fight him another time to help out before Wheeljack was killed, that wasn't really a fight. Here is an all-out brawl, and it's a big one, but it doesn't remain two-sided for long, as Silas plainly sees within given time. He sees utter fury in the eyes of Bulkhead. He doesn't notice it at first while they're brawling, but soon enough, Bulkhead begins to pick up more and more and more against Silas and begins to overpower him. Meanwhile, Smokescreen phase shifts Knockout as he does in canon, but he phase shifts him through a tree instead of the side of a ship. So just imagine Knockout or just any Decepticon being basically stuck inside a tree. Would be even more hilarious. Silas tries to take more of the offensive, seeing that Bulkhead's getting angrier and stronger and fiercer, pulling out 2 hammers, his guns, whatever he can do with Breakdown's body and everything. But then Bulkhead pulls a move out that he used against an early con that he actually uses in this story. He rips out cords in the center of Breakdown Silas's chest, and it pulls Silas out of Breakdown's corpse. So now we have a bruised and broken and battered and bloody and everything Silas on the ground out of Breakdown. And Bulkhead's about to finish him off and just go crazy when all of a sudden a claw strike hits Bulkhead square in the stomach, which would be the first time that this has happened, and then another hits him straight in the eye, like Ice Shenron, if you will. Call it that. Meanwhile, Smokescreen's bragging about the phase shifter and taunting Knockout when we see who the assailant of Bulkhead was, Starscream. And he goes to attack Smokescreen next like he did in canon, actually, but unfortunately for him, Smokescreen still had the phase shifter on. So he is able to take the ground and smack Starscream to the ground when he figures out he was just attacked. Starscream's very surprised to see this happen. And Smokescreen just lambasts Starscream, feeling very much in the high mood right now with putting Knockout in a tree, and says, "You clearly didn't see what happened the first time you encountered me," and points to the phase shifter, which, to be fair, in this story with Cliff around, Starscream didn't know about the phase shifter. So Smokescreen has the upper hand here and starts to fire incessantly at Starscream, not seeing Bulkhead anywhere around. So he just fires at Starscream, who gets up, uses the red energon to his advantage, and actually outpaces every shot that Smokescreen makes. So he can't do anything. It's like Ultra Instinct Starscream, if you will. And with this, in the moment's weakness, he swipes the phase shifter. So now Smokescreen is the one on the back foot, but this ain't gonna make him give up. It's Smokescreen. So he keeps on firing, but we all know it's not gonna do anything, especially not with the phase shifter in Starscream's hand. Now Starscream is the one to be overconfident and high and mighty and this, that, and the other thing. And he begins to taunt Smokescreen and everything, and is almost about to just go over quickly with the red energon and just swipe his spark out, but then he gets 2 wrecking balls slammed directly into his head, like that one con. Basically, Bulkhead's pulling out like early con tricks against a later opponent, which is Starscream. And now Starscream, having this happen to him, obviously is feeling immense head damage and just damage as a whole, and actually collapses to the ground in utter pain and agony from a Bulkhead whose eye is just spewing out energon from all sides, because this was a strong strike, and we all know how sharp Starscream's claws were. And Bulkhead has him on the ropes now, very angry. But Starscream, He just uses the red energon and sees that he can't win this fight. He obviously, with what just happened. So he enables the red energon, and without Bulkhead or Smokescreen realizing it, just assuming the body on the ground is just Silas dead, Starscream actually swipes Silas's human body off the ground and gets away. Smokescreen's very happy to see Bulkhead still alive, but then he sees what actually happened to Bulkhead and he gasps because now he sees Bulkhead's eye and his chest. That's just a dent, because we all know it was just a dent in canon, so it would be a dent here. But his eye, that's the main concern. And now Smokescreen realizes how much of a threat Starscream really is. And Bulkhead says, truer words were never spoken, but he's fine. He's had much worse pains being the early days of a wrecker and everything. And Wheeljack would be one to tell him, but, he's dead. And says that, while Starscream might still be a threat, he's a small one compared to the cons and everything. That's the main deal. And luckily for both of them, Starscream didn't swipe the key because he likely didn't know what it was. So this means that they have an extra key on their belt, because Starscream wasn't around to hear a conversation ensue about reviving Cybertron and everything. So Starscream would have no reason to swipe the key. So Bulkhead and Smokescreen just return to base. Meanwhile, Starscream at the Harbinger looks in utter evil glee at a very slowly dying Silas, who without breakdown is literally on the cusps of death. But thanks to Starscream wanting to use him to his own ends, for whatever ends are not known yet, he just decides to heal him, but in his own twisted way. For now, he's just leaving him there. And Silas is slowly still alive and sees Starscream standing over him. And Starscream just finds this poetic irony that but a short time ago it was him who was on the ground while Silas was standing over him. And this would be like a Starscream Megatron role reversal, except Silas is Megatron in this scenario. So the irony here. And Starscream says, "You better rest up, because once I actually put my mind into healing you and getting you on your feet, we have a lot to discuss." Meanwhile, at the base of the Autobots, Optimus and everyone has to deal with what just happened. Because even though it wasn't super big, it did result in Bulkhead having to get good medical care without Ratchet and get his eye back in shape, which wasn't too hard of a task, but it was still pretty, decent of a care unit to put in. And they had to make sure that the keys were safe, yada yada, other small stuff. And Optimus realizes that even if Bulkhead wasn't gravely injured, Starscream is still just as much a threat, if not more so, than Megatron and the cons. And he says that they're lucky that they're not only alive, but that the key didn't get swiped, because that could have very well been a backfiring moment right there. But concern is all still the rising factor here, with Starscream still out there, even if he doesn't know about the keys, and now being even faster with this red energon, and the fact that cons are still out there. They'll slowly start to realize what the Omega keys are, even without Soundwave, and the fact that Silas was missing, because they eventually figured it out. And if Starscream swiped Silas too, whether or not he lives, that could pose major trouble, which is why Starscream is just as much a threat. They all need to keep on the search for the keys and keep going with their mission, but even more carefully than before. And the Autobots all agree. Meanwhile, on the Nemesis, Megatron is utterly infuriated. His surveillance chief gone, the backup of him gone, the all too consistent falls of parts of his army, with only two bots slayed in the Autobots' name. And now Silas has just been abducted by Starscream and the relic isn't theirs. So now Megatron is done playing, especially with Starscream in the mix. And now Megatron is at a point where he just says, literally, screw it. And he summons the entire Seeker army and flyers of the rest of his army and decides that him personally, Dreadwing, and the entire army, including the Insecticons, are going to confront the Autobots and Starscream on this planet and blow up the whole planet if they have to. Literally. They are at that point. At the Harbinger, Starscream detects the Decepticons on the move. Literally seems the whole army. And Starscream guesses they're looking for both him and the Autobots. But he could not think of a better time, as now he can truly put his plan into action. Silas is now much more awake, but again, still slowly dying because he hasn't been fully healed. He's been healed enough with Starscream's whatever he would have to a point where he can speak and somewhat sit up. And he's scared and doesn't know what Starscream's gonna do to him. But with Silas at the point of seeing Starscream, Starscream looks over and now he explains his plan. He's now going to use Silas to his own ends, as Silas used him for his. And this is the perfect opportunity. And he taunts Silas. He says that he should have never taken him down on his offer of the synthetic energon and the T-Cogs. He would have never known any of that if it weren't for him. He should be on his knees begging for life right now, but in the sorry state that he's in, he can't really see how. But that's not the point. The point is, Silas will work for him one way or another, now that that should really pay off the debt of what he gave to him back then. If he don't, he's going to personally put him down for good. And maybe if he actually works with him, he'll get something out of it. And he literally gets up in Silas's bloody, broken face and asks him if they're clear for a deal. Silas takes a minute to reflect on this, because on one hand, he really thinks that he should just be put down without a body, really. And this one being crippled, he doesn't know how Starscream could fix that. And that's just it. It's Starscream. The guy who was with him in the past, he treated wrong. He's not willing to admit that because it's Silas, but he's in a real pickle. But in all intents and purposes, he doesn't have an option because Starscream said it would literally kill him. It's blackmail, but Silas just says he'll go along with it. But on one condition. He gets healed to the utmost extreme, his body fully back to good use, and he gets something out of it by getting Breakdown's corpse still reliable and usable to him if he's really going to have to go along with all this. He wants something out of it. And Starscream, seeing as Silas is willing to be cooperative, he complies with this, but he feels that Silas will just turn traitor on him at any moment, so he is sure to watch his own back in that regard. He prepares the remote ground bridge and gets his own energon supplies, or what he would find near the area, as well as red energon that he has, and with time heals Silas, and it pretty much is all a mix at the time and hard to work with the materials, but Silas is able to be fully brought back and is able to walk and function as his normal human body could. Pretty much back to full health. Now, how in the world does this happen? Well, we know in canon, when Raphael was shot with the Dark Energon, Ratchet and Nurse Darby and all of them, they combined Energon with Dark Energon to meet it head on. So, if you think about it, Raph, in the end, would have Energon in his body, which would still allow him to live in the end. Now, I'm not it's obvious that Silas wasn't put into Breakdown because at that point Breakdown was dead, so there likely wouldn't be any energon left in him. But I'm going to take the fact that he was wired into Breakdown's corpse with mech and the fact that the energon would mix into him like it did with Raphael and basically combine the two. I feel that it would work, especially with red energon. You never know. It's just a guess. But Starscream says that this should put Silas on his side 100%. And Silas has to admit, he actually feels a lot better than when he had his original body before. It feels like a new body, so to speak. But then again, he does look down in sadness, seeing that he not only has been put into the situation, but he has no mech soldiers, and he's literally been forced into all this. It just doesn't feel right as to working with Megatron, working with mech. It's a very awkward situation for Silas. But Starscream says now the plan of his can finally begin to overthrow the warship with its little forces and take down the bots and cons. He prepares a ground bridge with his remote, but Breakdown's body is still on the ground. And Starscream lets Silas in on a little secret. While he was sleeping, Starscream rewired components of Breakdown's corpse and actually made a hatch so that Silas could step in like a remote robot Cybertronian and actually close the latch. It'd be like he never left the body. It's just, it would be a different way. He wouldn't be stuck in there like he was before. And Silas, this actually does capture his attention, but his eyes look up to Starscream as if to say, all right, let's get on with it. The old Silas. And this really catches Starscream. Now he feels he'll really turn on him. But he just brushes this aside for his ultimate plan and his ego and gets into the ground bridge with Silas in tow, and they enter the Decepticon warship. Starscream is very much sitting pretty in his own world right now. He never thought that up to this point, with his many setbacks, that it would be this easy. He's had so much victory, but so much failure. But this feels like he's literally on top of the world right now. But then he hears behind him a weapon begin to enable itself. And Starscream just should have guessed. And without even turning around to face his assailant, he just sticks his hand and claws straight behind him. And this not only goes through Breakdown's entire corpse body, but it actually impales, decapitates, and severs Silas in the process, killing him instantly. Because Starscream wasn't playing. And to make absolute sure that Silas never comes back, he shoots and claws Breakdown's corpse to utter nothingness. Literally, the pieces that it was from when Arachnid killed him make that quadruple, if not 5 times more so. Now, let me explain. Starscream, from the get-go, knew that Silas would betray him and try to basically get power over him or just stay with his side of Megatron. It was basically a gamble, and Starscream knew it from the start. He was betting on either taking out Silas at a later date when he finally rose to power, or literally just icing him at the first opportunity when he did try to kill him, which was this scenario. Starscream inadvertently alerted the cons that are left on the warship, the vehicle ones, the car ones, not the flyers, because they all went out with Megatron and Dreadwing. And Knockout is there too. And he and the cons are very surprised to see Starscream here. And Starscream's surprised to see Khan still on the warship and Knockout there. I mean, there's no flyers and no big bots because clearly they all went with Megatron all over the globe to search for him and the bots. He can detect that much. And this actually makes his moment even better because now he can use the cons on this warship to his own end, even better than what was the deal with Silas. And he says that they should all be thanking him. Now he can be their leader once again. And he even looks over and says that he did Knockout the most favor of all. And Knockout and the other cons just look over to see Silas break down whatever the frick you want to call him in millions of pieces. And Knockout is very surprised at this. Not only that the fact that Starscream was the one to do this, clearly with the noises and everything, but the fact that it happened so fast and that Starscream was the one to do it. It's just all out of nowhere. But Starscream says that not only was this just expected of him to eventually, in the end, triumph over Silas, who once wronged him and took his T-Cog, but it also was just poetic justice that Silas was outdid by a con after outdoing cons. And he should be thanking him, Knockout, because he avenged Breakdown. Knockout is still very perturbed by this, especially coming from Starscream, and this actually annoys Starscream because he brings up the fact that once he wanted Megatron dead, same as him. So if anything, they should be sharing this new alliance that he's preparing for them. The cons here can either do one of two things. They can either fall in line with him, as they once did when Megatron wasn't the leader and he was seemingly dead, or he can just ice them all just like Silas. And Ratchet, who he brings up. He would finally have people to gloat about killing, fully. And Knockout and the other cons, not seeing an out of this and actually agreeing with Starscream on many levels for who he once was, decide to inevitably go with it, not seeing an ultimately better option. So with that, Starscream has assumed total control over the warship and its denizens. And at the Autobot base, Optimus and the bots see that Megatron, as well as pretty much the entire Decepticon army, are out, and they know, Prime knows, why. They're looking for him and likely Starscream too. But Starscream, whenever he'll show up with Silas or whatever, I'm not knowing the whole thing, they'll have to wait, because they can't let Megatron and the Decepticons harm the human population. They have to fight. So he tells the Autobots to prepare every single thing at their disposal, because this is going to be one fight that they likely have to finish for good. And he says his iconic thing, Autobots, prepare to roll out. Except this would be the most serious rollout, considering Prime in this story and the seriousness of the moment. So, in a deep, vast wasteland in the outskirts of Jasper, Nevada, is the big moment of this finale. Megatron, as well as Dreadwing, the entire Decepticon army, meaning the Flyers, obviously, the Seeker army and such, as well as the rest of the Insecticons, meet Team Prime with the absence of Ratchet and Wheeljack, but the add-on of Smokescreen, all meet and focus themselves in the center of this wasteland in Jasper. I know I'm mentioning it again, but it's just for context. But anyways, Megatron faces the Autobots down, all of them, and says that this finally ends now. It's time that they finally ended this and stopped playing around with small little moments, collectings, and just slide off the chivalry and finally end this war. And without further fanfare, he just launches himself at Optimus and the bots. And this is where we would get the first clash of the Dark Starsaber versus the OG Starsaber. Meanwhile, while they're fighting, slowly, all the bots and cons, during this immense struggle, see the Nemesis begin to fly overhead. Megatron, he actually stops and is very confused by this because he didn't order Knockout and the Cons to come here. And even if they came here, it would just be small help at best. No. And then his eyes grow even more wide. Starscream is up at the top of the ship, howling with maniacal laughter, seeing Megatron and everyone in immense shock. And with this, he is literally on top of the world, and this would be the most piped up that we would ever see Starscream. And from there on, he yells, "Let the reign of Lord Starscream begin." And he prepares the remote ground bridge, the red energon, every single article on the warship, and any con there for an all-out war to destroy the bots and cons. And this would be big. Megatron is utterly infuriated beyond immeasurable doubt. The most he's ever been in his entire existence. Because Starscream, especially Starscream, he should have known that he should have iced him at the first opportunity. And now, it literally has come to bite him with his ship being stolen by Starscream. And he acknowledges he can't do this alone with his ship and Starscream having this much. So he looks to Optimus, saying that they once teamed up to save this world from Unicron, just for them to get right back at it. But now he will begrudgingly do it again. But he tells Optimus to not destroy his ship in the process. Just destroy Starscream and any con on his ship who dares pledge allegiance to Starscream. Optimus says and thinks that it's pretty much nigh impossible to be able to not destroy the ship with Starscream utilizing it in the way he is and what he has, but teaming up with Megatron to stop Starscream and his pretty much unstoppable reign as of now, they don't really have much of a choice than to try and go along with it, and he's just glad to be teaming up with Megatron. So Megatron's whole army, as well as all of Team Prime, focus their efforts squarely on Starscream and the warship for the biggest battle of history. And with that, this ultimately puts this Transformers first story of mine at an end. Now, how, if any of you are Transformers Prime fans or anything like that, you guys are probably asking, how can you end it like that? Well, I'll explain, because I hit a roadblock here, but it allowed me to wrap up the story in a way that would work. So, with Optimus and Megatron teaming up in that moment against Starscream, who would have full command over the ship, before I got to that scene, I had a decision to make. I was either going to make Silas kill Starscream and him take over and possibly either go against Megatron, like Starscream, or actually use the warship in Megatron's favor and destroy the Autobots, which would have been kind of a dark ending, or they would have just gotten away. Who knows how I would have really written in the rest of Silas's play, or even that section in general. Or I would have had Starscream and Silas team up, which, because of Silas, how he was, and how I built in sort of a, connection or development with Starscream and Silas, I really thought that Silas trying to turn on Starscream would have worked, and Starscream would have known about it and wouldn't have fallen query to how he did when he met Silas, and especially in this story. Now, I know you guys are asking, how do you wrap up the story like this? Well, I'll explain. Whenever Starscream shows up with the ship and Megatron and everyone, they team up and everything, it would basically end in the way that Megatron wouldn't want it to. So basically, it would be on Megatron's own behalf and Starscream's, if you will, and I'll explain. Because the Nemesis wasn't actually, like, destroyed in a way until basically the end of the franchise. And even then, in the crappy bootlegged sequel, I'm pretty sure they had it still around. But here, Optimus would almost be literally given no choice. With Starscream having way more red energon, Knockout and the cons would be on his side, because we saw, even if some of them were steadfast to Megatron, especially Dreadwing, it would... Knockout and Starscream pretty much had a bromance throughout the entirety of the show. Heck, both of them even teamed to wanting to literally mercy kill Megatron. So here, Knockout and all the cons that would be left on the ship would basically just be on Starscream's side. So with Red Energon, the Nemesis, and every other con and weapon at their disposal, it would basically lead to Megatron not being able to get the jump on anyone fully, barely making a compelling case, Dreadwing getting himself killed trying to go against Starscream, who used Skyquake's, Terracon to try and kill the Autobots, it being much different in this story without any humans, and Optimus and maybe even Megatron unfortunately having to destroy the Nemesis in some way, shape, or form way of getting the jump on Starscream. But the Red Energon, even though the Nemesis's destruction would lead to almost every con's death on the ship except for Starscream and Megatron, the battle would not end there. We would still have all of Team Prime, and now an angry, vengeful Megatron and the rest of the cons, along with Starscream just by himself to deal with. And after that, a war would enrage. I'm not going to say that any more of the Autobots would fall, but I do believe that ones like Cliffjumper and RC, who had meant so much with Cliffjumper's survival, how much he meant now, would ultimately sacrifice themselves if the battle went sideways. But with how the story has gone, with how I've just said it here, I'm thinking that it would just lead to Team Prime, especially with the Star Saber, and barely any cons left, literally getting the jump on Megatron, Starscream, and the franchise basically ending there, with the only exceptions and changes being that Starscream and Knockout are killed, Ratchet and Wheeljack are not in the picture, and the only human influence throughout the entirety of the story here would be Agent Fowler. And that would be it. And they would have left the Autobot base a lot sooner because of the scraplets and the humans not being there. Many times, like, even in some sections, I'd be like, well, the story's ended there. It's like a Dale situation, but way different. Because it's not a dream or a vision. This is literally how the story would go. With Team Prime ultimately coming out on top, but it would ultimately end the show a season later in the good way, even if it would be unwillingly wanting to kill Megatron, like Optimus said that he didn't want to. But ultimately, at this point, with Ratchet and Wheeljack's deaths, Prime's character in this show would be dramatically changed. It would be more like the live-action Transformers, and his character would be a lot different. As for, that's going to be the next thing. what about the next season? He still had like 16 episodes and a movie to cover. There's no way you could just bottle it up with that. But I can. Because with the Omega Lock and Team Prime having the keys and not having to worry about the humans, bar Agent Fowler, they would be able to revitalize and revive Cybertron without any Khan interference because of this. And this would lead to them getting back to Cybertron in the beginning of Season 3. But there is one unfinished problem, though. Shockwave. He would still be alive, and so would Predaking. But even with a weaker Optimus Prime and no Super Optimus Prime, I do feel that with the Starsaber and all of Team Prime and what they've been through, Shockwave and Predaking alone, they wouldn't be able to keep up. Ultra Magnus would eventually come to see that Cybertron has been fixed, and he would be there to help out too, so that's an extra hand. After that, there would be no Super Optimus Prime, and Bumblebee, I feel, would get his voice back most likely. I don't feel that he got his voice back because of the cyber matter. He only got revived because of getting shot. He only got revived because of the cyber matter. So he would get his voice back in time, because the live action movies even proved that he could get it back in time. And after that, the end movie would ultimately, I feel, possibly either not happen, or it would go almost the same exact way, except no Wheeljack and a weaker Optimus. But overall, that's the end of the story. Cliffjumper's involvement means that Team Prime overall, being weaker a little than they were, and less, added with the humans, they would still be able to pull through, and Cliffjumper would pull his weight, which is what, honestly, I think should have happened, meaning that Cliffjumper, RC, and Starscream would become utter rivals throughout the end, which would ultimately cause Starscream's end for thinking that even with Red Energon and the Nemesis, he could take over. But we all know that with Starscream, it never works out, which would ultimately lead to Prime ending a lot sooner. But that's the story. That is the story of what if Cliffjumper survived. Now, I know it was kind of bottled into a finale like this. Honestly, I didn't intend to write it like this, and I hope that you guys aren't deterred by this as my first Transformers What If, because I think I did really good with many moments in the series. It's just when I got to this part, and, Starscream taking over the Nemesis, bottling it up like this has just felt like the best way to end the story. And a good start to the Transformers What Ifs. Now, since this is done, my next project is going to be another one-off, which is what if John Wick was in The Walking Dead? And that's basically going to touch upon who he would utterly decimate, who he would be able to be on par with, what weapons he would use or come across, and how he would deal with the walkers or fit into the story. I'm not going to spoil every single little detail, because it's going to be probably, besides the Jigsaw one and the Jason one, my most in-depth crossover as of yet, because it's freaking John Wick. And I was going to do Harry Potter, which many of you probably know from the schedules and everything, but honestly, Harry Potter's just one of those things that I look at now. With how it is in the universe, it's just better left watched, not looked into as what-ifs and stuff like that. But I do hope that you guys enjoyed this Cliffjumper story. Look forward soon to the John Wick one-off, because it's going to be pretty freaking intense and cool to look into. And I'll see you guys then.
Everything I see is red.
Tear it down, then paint this town red, red, red.